Hey guys, welcome back to a Study in Truth podcast. Join Bill and me today as we talk about the Tri-Cities School of Preaching and Christian Development. So today I've got Bill Haywood with me. He's the director of the Tri-Cities School of Preaching and Christian Development. Bill, thank you for being with me.
Hey, man, thank you for inviting me.
I say today, I guess I should say tonight. We're pulling a late nighter, burning the midnight oil. Bill's a really good friend to me, was one of my favorite teachers in school. Bill, how long have you been director at the school now?
I began full-time in July of 22. Of course, I've been associated with the school from day one. Actually, even before day one, when it was a conception in the mind of Wesley Simons and Eddie Kraft and some others. But I've been teaching from the beginning and then was privileged to become the director in July of 22.
Yeah, they mentioned how you were the best director, which I guess I would agree with too, but they really paved the way for all of this. I mean,
absolutely.
They did such a good work.
I could not have done what they did. I mean, it is amazing. They started from nothing. We used to teach in the old church building. Well, it's not an old church building, but the existing church building. We taught in a few classrooms over there, and over time, we had a trailer for a while, and then we had this wonderful school building and the studios that we're in right now. So it was amazing what they've done. Of course, God's providence has been blessing all of this.
Sure. So we'll just kind of start off with some questions I've got about the school. But before we get into the more specific questions, Bill, tell us, why do we need preaching schools in the first place?
Well, that's a great question, and I will answer that, but I'd like to back up to give you what's behind that. And I can tell you why Tri-City School of Preaching and Christian Development exists. We exist to change the world. I mean, we ultimately, that is the goal, because that's a biblical goal. Jesus said, "Go therefore, make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit." And so this idea of making disciples, it is the idea of helping people become conformed to the image of Christ, which Romans 8:29, that's what it's all about, being conformed to the image of Christ. So why we need preaching schools, why we need preachers, ultimately, that's God's plan. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, beginning about verse 18, it's through the foolishness of the message preached that God uses that message to save mankind. And we're in a desperate time right now in this nation. Now, there's some great things happening around the world. We're involved in some international work, and we've got preachers over in Africa that we're training. It seems like a revival is sweeping across Africa right now. And but here in the United States of America, we have a situation where one of our speakers in our lectureship this week made the point, we're living in a post-Christian era. And matter of fact, it's probably even worse than that in the fact that it's a post-truth era. And so we need men who are well-equipped, who know the Word of God, who also understand the philosophical languages that are out there in the world, so they know how to communicate. So it's because the gospel is the only hope.
Yeah.
And so that's the reason why we need preachers.
That's good. And what you said kind of made me think of 2 Timothy 2 and verse 2, where Paul encourages Timothy and says, "The things which you have heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust these to faithful men who will be able to teach others also." And so your job and my job eventually, hopefully one day, is to train other people in any way I can, whether it's encouraging people to go to school or teaching people in a school, whatever way we can do it, or even supporting someone in school.
Absolutely. So, and that's a great point right there, Luke, because the reality is the church has a mandate right there in 2 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 2. We're very appreciative of great Christian universities. My sons went to a Christian university, but they don't have a mandate. And it's not wrong for them to teach Bible and for men to come out of there and be preachers. They don't have the same mandate that the church has. The church has a mandate to train preachers. And it's really interesting there in verse number 3. If you have that still open, go ahead and read verse 3.
He says, "Suffer hardship with me as a good soldier of Christ Jesus."
As a good soldier. That's what we do. We exist to challenge the status quo of this nasty, messed up world that we're in. And when we think about the status quo, people saying you can be any gender that you want. It's okay to abort babies. It's all right to take advantage of people. Women can be treated like objects. That's the status quo. We've got to challenge that. And the way we do that is to train gospel warriors. We're not just training. I think sometimes that people expect us to train nice little boys to preach nice little sermons to nice little people to be nicer little people. Well, that's not getting the job done. We need some gritty men that believe that the gospel is the power of God unto salvation, and they're going to preach it, and they're going to hang in there because they realize that's the only hope the world has.
For sure. And I guess you basically already answered the second question about the mission of the school. And I think you pretty much just said it right there, to train gospel warriors. I come from a denomination, and, I see the need even more than I think a lot of people see it. Maybe they do, if they've been raised in the church, but I see it even more just in my life, how much people need the gospel. Because a lot of people have a false gospel, one that's, as Paul said, is perverted, or some translations say distorted. And so we need people strong.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And, and I hope I don't take us in the wrong direction here, but, you made me think of the reality is that obviously you don't want to leave this world if you're not right with God.
Mm-hmm.
But also you don't want to live in this world if you're not right with God. 1 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 8, Paul said, bodily exercise profits a little, but godliness is profitable for all things, having the promise of the life that now is and that which is to come. And so we see that the promise of the life that now is, the best life anyone can live, is the Christian life.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that upsets me so much about some of the moral ills of our society, sometimes Christians look at things like casinos, and we did a lot to try to encourage people to vote against a recent casino referendum, and they think, you got a list of rules. No, here's the thing. The Christian has a great life because they realize, I don't want to mess around with that. The casino, as a matter of fact, in Bristol, Virginia, there's been a casino there now maybe 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Story after story after story is coming out about people who have lost their life savings. There was a story about a woman who left, and I had to be careful. It was a small child. Let's just say a small child. I don't remember the age.
Mm-hmm.
Left a small child in the automobile for hours while she went into the casino to gamble.
Mm.
And you think about that and you think, you know what? If that person was a Christian, if that person studied the Bible, they would realize what's important in life.
Yeah.
Pursuing their own selfish greed, that's not good. Taking care of your family, loving others, encouraging others. So part of the problem is if you leave this life and you're not right with God, you're going to be lost. But living this life as anything other than a Christian is just vapid and horrible. And so, that's part of what we're doing, challenging the status quo in that sense.
And you mentioned something that made me think how much just being at the school, not to glorify the school in any way as far as above God and above his word, but being here during the time I was here really helped me morally. It helped me focus. I was busy. Not that that's the purpose of coming here, but it was a good consequence, if I could say that. It was something that helped me stay so busy. I didn't have time to sin much.
Yeah.
And that really helped. And I think that's another thing to consider.
Well, and this dovetails even with the purpose of the church, the association, the fellowship, being around people who that their number one goal is to please God, honor God, get to heaven. I need that. Mm-hmm. I need that. I need to be in every assembly. I need to associate. And it's really a problem. It's one of the blessings of the school, and people sometimes get the idea, they say, well, that's an artificial environment. Well, it doesn't have to be. Mm-hmm. It's unfortunate that we live such busy lives and we're running here and running there that our lives are not integrated the way they were apparently in the first century. But we can strive for that, and we need that because we need one another. That's the story of 1 Corinthians chapter 12. We're a body, and we're interconnected, and we're interdependent upon each other. And so in a small miniature way, we see that here at the school, and it is a beautiful atmosphere, and it's a great launching pad for deepening your faith and being able to be equipped for ministry.
Sure. Talking about the fellowship, like I got to live out Acts 2:46 day by day, continuing with one mind in the temple, which, in this case is in the preaching school, breaking bread from house to house, taking our meals together, which we were breaking bread from one Mexican restaurant to another.
Yeah.
And taking our meals together with gladness and sincerity of heart. That it creates a community. We talk about the mission, it creates gospel warriors, but there's consequences to that, good ones, that it creates a family. It creates so much unity, I think. And I'm really, really glad that happened.
This is really key, Luke, because in the school, there is an academic side, but it's so much more than an academic side. In the early days of the school, when it was still a dream, we looked at all kinds of things, and we challenged every assumption. And at some point, we asked the question, okay, if Jesus had a school of preaching, and he did, what would it look like? And we realized that it would look very different than a lot of the traditional schools. And we're not weird, but we realized that there had to be a heavy dose of that association and that mentoring. You can even use the word discipling. And so while we're involved in distance learning, we've been blessed with technology, and we do allow some distance learning. For the most part, we want our students to be resident students because the internet's a great way to communicate data. But you have to have that association and look at each other and face to face and be able to laugh together and cry together and pat somebody on the back and encourage them. And when that student, is thinking about giving up, which is typically, your first quarter. I was just talking to one of the students tonight that's doing so well, and he reflected back on his first quarter, and I was bragging on him. He said, well, I've come a long way since my first quarter. He was a great student from the beginning, but you get a little overwhelmed. Oh, yeah. And you need that family around you that says, you can do this. Yeah. It's possible. And so, the school gives us that microcosm, but it's not artificial. It gives us a good picture of what the church is supposed to be.
Yeah. I want to move on to the next point, but I will say this real quick. Just in my situation, I have to take classes online, but there's nothing like being here. I miss that. It's a blessing. And so, but I want to move into the next one now, just about students. How many students do you have here currently?
We have 9 full-time students. Okay. We have actually, to be honest with you, in our continuing education for preachers, I'm not sure how many students we have right now in that program. It's a handful. But we have 9 full-time resident students, a handful of our continuing education students. And then for our Christian development distance learning at night, we're averaging about 50 students right now. We expect that to actually go up because next fall, we're going to be offering 3 classes per quarter, a class on Monday night that will be distance learning only, and then we'll offer 2 classes on Tuesday night that will be available on campus or through distance learning. And we're averaging about 50 students per quarter in our distance learning. We have students as far away as California, Louisiana, Missouri. But now let me tell you this. This is thrilling and heartbreaking at the same time. We have 14 preacher training students in Tanzania that we're teaching. As a matter of fact, early this morning, Ethan Tate was late getting into the assembly because he was teaching the book of Romans for the school. We do all the teaching for the school in Tanzania, and we're making arrangements to help raise money for the Mosquito River Church of Christ to purchase some property. As a result of that, we now have 2 secondary government schools that have asked us to teach Bible for their students. And one school is around 350 students, and the other one is teetering right at 300 students. It takes up a tremendous amount of time, but we've got some great people involved in the international work. Keith Hovis, Ralph Clevenger, just a whole bunch of people involved in that. So literally over in Africa, we're teaching probably 700 people each week over in Africa. So it's an amazing thing. And We're just been extremely blessed.
That's awesome. Okay. So as you can, if you're listening, this student body is growing. I mean, when I was here, there was maybe 5 of us. Bill has done a really good job at recruiting. And I want to mention that too about recruiting. If you want him at your congregation, telling you about the school, giving you information about it. I mean, listening to this podcast is one thing, but if you actually want to meet him and learn more information, he'd be happy, I'm sure, to be there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We'd be thrilled to be there. And I'm on the road probably about 40 weekends a year combined between gospel meetings and just going different places.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'd be thrilled to come. If I can't come, our Dean of Public Relations, David B. Jones, would be happy to come. And, but yes, anything that we can do to help a local congregation be involved in training gospel preachers.
You say that. I've got 4 downloads in South Africa and 4 in the UK and 1 in Australia. So if you're willing to travel there to recruit for the school.
Absolutely.
Yeah. If a church would pay for it, go ahead. Actually, I know the guy that listens, I think it's the guy that listens in Australia. He was which he didn't go here. He went to Memphis, but he went all the way back to Australia to preach. So, this goes all over the place.
Yeah. And, I was just talking to the director from Memphis the other day, BJ Clark, and expressed to him how much we appreciate faithful schools. If it were not for schools of preaching, the brotherhood would be in great danger right now. Now, let me quickly mention something else to you that I want folks to know about. Do you know about our new Link Year program?
No, I was actually going to ask you to discuss that.
Okay, so we have developed a curriculum. We will be utilizing some of the curriculum that we use, and we are creating some new classes. And the idea of it is for Link Year, it is the link between high school graduation and college, or between high school graduation and your career. A lot of Gen Z, and I hear great things about Gen Z. There's a lot of evidence out there that this generation that's coming on right now, that they're much more conservative. They're much more forward thinking, and they realize that maybe a 4-year degree is a wise thing to do. Maybe there's something else to do. We're just saying, hey, let's get grounded in Scripture. Let's get grounded in some basic apologetics and think about some philosophical things, so that as you either go to college or you go into the world, you'll be prepared for that. We hope to kick that off this August. It's a 1-year program, and we'll help them find housing. We're in the process of developing some student housing here, but that will take a little while. But we'll work with the student and help them get it. And I also have to say this: tuition is covered. Now, they'll have to cover their living expenses, but for all our resident programs, they're all tuition free. For our distance learning, it's all tuition. I shouldn't say tuition free. It's going to cost the students some midnight oil, and it's going to cost them some labor. But, that's a great opportunity. Let me just say this one more thing. The Mormons, their young men will go off. They call it going to mission for 2 years. Mm-hmm. The young ladies, I believe it's 18 months. Seems that it would make sense for the Lord's people to say, we're going to take 12 months to get our young people well grounded so that they can go out into the world and be effective servants for the kingdom in a local congregation and make a difference.
Yeah. You mentioned the Mormons. They're some great people. I mean, very nice people, although, we obviously know they're wrong in their doctrine. They spend, I think, like an hour. They try to spend an hour each day in a home if they can, evangelizing. And it's because they're just so busy. And if we could see the church doing that, and you have already kind of touched on some of the new projects. So we'll kind of pass by that. I think Link is about the only upcoming new thing that's coming up, right?
Pretty much. We do have a camp that's going to be this summer, July 7th.
Yeah.
Through that Thursday, whatever that is. I think would that be about the 11th? And it's a leadership training camp, and it's for boys age 10 through 17. And we've had a lot of requests to do something for girls, and that will come later. We have nothing wrong. And we don't train women to preach. Your wife, Kimberly, attended classes here. We want women to come. Obviously, we don't train them to preach, but they need to be trained. We'll do something in the future for girls, but this is our first year, and we've got to, we're still kind of learning the ropes and everything. But we want to train young men to do whatever the local congregation needs them to do, whether it would be leading, singing, preaching, teaching Bible classes, whatever is needed. They need to be trained to do that.
For sure. And you mentioned the women, in 2 Timothy 2 there, verse 2, it's interesting when he says, commit these things to faithful men. If I'm not mistaken, the Greek word there is anthropos, not aner. So it's like faithful people who'll be able to teach others also. So although, our main priority here is to train preachers, the women can teach in so many ways. Go out there and either help their husbands teach people and personal Bible studies, or teach the women, the younger women, as, Paul told Timothy. And so there's just so much the women also here can do. And so I wanted to that actually covers a question I had about someone wanting to come to the school that didn't want to be a pulpit minister. I know that wasn't my original plan. When I got here, I'm like, yeah, preaching, that's dumb. Like, I'm not going to do that. Ugh. And then all of a sudden, like, I had to. There was this compelling feeling to do it. And so, you may come here, you don't want to be a preacher at first. You might end up wanting to be one, but you don't have to go to heaven to be a preacher.
Well,
to be a preacher to go to heaven.
Yeah, we got a call from a young man who's a student now he was in Missouri at the time, and he was pretty adamant. I don't want to be a preacher, but I want to be a soul winner. And he had been laboring to do that. And he said, but I'm running into all kinds of issues I never dreamed of. I need some more training. We said, we'll be happy to work with you. Now that he's come, he's changed his mind, but we're just as sincere about it as we were before. You don't have to become a preacher to attend here. We need preachers, but we also need people who are great Bible teachers and soul winners and servants. And the church desperately needs that. And that's the way we're challenging the status quo, changing the world. We're not just an employment agency for the church. We're trying to change the world. That's what Christ wants us to do.
Yeah, and it changes with one person at a time.
Absolutely.
So we've covered most of the things. I want to talk about two more things. You've already touched on the cost. Again, it's quote unquote tuition free. You don't have to pay anything to attend the classes, although, as you mentioned, lodging, you may have to worry about that. But I've learned this from my time here. If you really want to take your time away from secular work, from whatever it may be that's distracting you, God's going to make a way.
Oh, yeah.
I learned that. Like, there would be times I'd be so worried, I'm not getting enough support. And, I know what Matthew 6:33 says, blah, 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 God doesn't mean that. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I'd walk out to my mailbox and here's an old lady who sent me a $500 check that just randomly heard about me one day. And it's like, oh, God does say what he means. So, if that's something you're worried about, getting support, we're actually told, I think there isn't a commandment out there that backs up that whole idea of getting support while you're here in school. I used to have some trouble with that. When I first came here, I had trouble with asking for money because I thought to myself, well, I'm not really doing anything. I'm not really, I feel like I'm not earning that money. But then Paul, someone pointed this out to me and it made me feel a lot better about it. In 1 Corinthians chapter 9 and verse 14, he says, so also the Lord directed those who proclaim the gospel to get their living from the gospel. And so it's scriptural to get support while you're preaching the gospel or even training to preach the gospel.
And here's the thing, Luke. For every hour you're in class, you have at least 2 hours outside of class. The students are in class 18 hours a week, and it varies. We ask the instructors to try to limit, if it's a 3-hour class, the student should have no more than 6 hours of homework per week. And we asked them to try to balance that and figure out what's legitimate in reading and writing and other assignments. But for some students, it will be a lot more than 2 hours. So as having said all of that, it's highly likely students might be working on schoolwork between in class and out of class. They might be involved 55, 60 hours a week. It doesn't leave a lot of time for a job. And people say, well, they ought to have a job as well as come here. Well, the idea is we want them to be able to put all their focus on this.
Mm-hmm.
And when someone calls up and says, you either come to work or you're fired, we don't want them to have to deal with that. We want them to have 3 years where they can focus on diving into God's word, learning the text, and also maturing personally so they become more conformed to the image of Christ.
I think about, I was working at Subaru before I came here, and I wanted to study the Bible with people. I just became a Christian expert on evangelism, obviously. Just kidding. And I didn't handle it very well. And the manager there told me, you can't do that while you're here. I said, yeah, I'll be more subtle with people and more gentle. And he goes, no, you can't talk to customers about the Bible. And I said, I quit. I just walked out that day. I said, and that's when Drew, I think this was Providence. I can't say that's definitely, but that's when Drew Leonard, one of the instructors here, said, hey, have you thought about Tri-City School of Preaching? And he actually wrote letters to different congregations and encouraged them to send me support. And it worked out beautifully. So,
matter of fact, I don't know if you had intended to do this, but it might be that someone's listening right now and says, well, I'd like to support the school. I'd like to support a student.
Mm-hmm.
And I very unabashedly say, we need your money. Now, let me say this. Let me tell you about our top 5 priorities, because whenever I talk about money, I want people to know our top priorities. Number one will always be number 1, to glorify Christ and his church. Number 2, take care of the students. Number 3, take care of the alumni. Number 4, recruiting. And number 5, raising money. And it takes money. We've got to keep the lights on. We have secretaries that we pay and equipment that we have to buy and that sort of thing. And so I very unabashedly say, yes, we need generous Christians to help us out. Now, I made mention of this last night at the Friends and Alumni Dinner. If giving money to the school will change the house you live in, the food you eat, the car you drive, being able to take care of your family, any of those sorts of things, don't do it.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have extra, we promise to do the very best we can to use that money to fulfill our number 1 goal, which is to glorify Christ and his church. And so reach out to us. Matter of fact, you can go to our website, Tri-City School of Preaching and Christian Development, or just go to schoolofpreaching.com, and it will direct you to Tri-City School of Preaching and Christian Development. And there's a donate button on there, or you can call us and we'll give you more instructions on how to do that.
Okay, now you just reminded me. I will be sure to put the website of the school on my link tree. You can go to my social media and find the link tree on a Study in Truth podcast on Facebook and Instagram if you missed that. And don't be afraid to send us your money. It's for a good cause. And, I think about Philippians chapter 4 and verse 18, Paul needed support in what he did. And he said that was a fragrant aroma, an acceptable sacrifice, well-pleasing to God. Maybe you're out there listening and you're not very good at evangelism. You're not very good at preaching. And I mean, I have to be frank. There's some people that just really aren't meant to get up in the pulpit sometimes. They're just not designed for that. But they can be just as effective sending a student money. They are evangelizing. They are preaching and helping a preacher.
Absolutely.
So just don't be afraid to do whatever you can do. And then the last thing I think I wanted to talk about, let's see, we've talked about cost. We've talked about we've talked about online classes. And again, you've mentioned people that want to move here. You're working on lodging. The last thing I want to talk about is the classes. So if I'm not mistaken, is it still the first 2 years are simple, just Bible books of the Bible, learning how to be a preacher classes, and then the third year is more apologetic?
Basically, now we have our first 2 years we have, and we tweak that a little bit. We have ladies that come through, they don't go through the preacher in their work, and we'll tweak that in some special ways for them. We have a wonderful dean of women, Kathy Jones, that works with the women. And we'll do different things with our link year, that 1 year program. But the first year is designed to get you grounded in the scriptures, But we also have some unique classes those first 2 years, inspiration of the Bible, some things like that. And then, yes, the third year focuses in on apologetics. And when we think about apologetics, we might be thinking about the scientific stuff, and that's involved, but it's really more than just that. Matter of fact, you took a class that I teach, The Problem of Evil, Pain, and Suffering, which the thing about that, that is the atheist argument. That's the only argument that they have where they can get any traction. But there are answers to it.
Sure.
But we've really got to think about it, and just quick cliches do not get the job done. And so many young people will go off to university and they're sitting in the class and a professor begins to present problem after problem after problem. And in essence, they say, and where was God? Mm-hmm. Where was God? Apparently, either God doesn't care, or God doesn't know about it, or God's not strong enough to do anything. Any one of those three, if that's the case, then God's not God. Mm-hmm. And a lot of young people, their faith has been shipwrecked because of that problem. And we talk about other classes. We have a class in worldviews. I believe you've taken that class as well. And so we do the scientific stuff, but I say the scientific stuff. We talk about the teleological argument, the cosmological argument, and those sorts of things in classes. But we also talk about some of the philosophical problems and trying to learn the language, the philosophical language that's out there, so that we know how to communicate with people more effectively.
Yeah, for sure. Actually, in an episode previous to this, when I did one on evil, pain, and suffering, which I should be finishing recording tomorrow with Ethan, but you'll hear that before this episode. So it's like, whoa, that's a time warp. But if you like that episode, that's due to stuff I learned in class here. I didn't even know that was a problem until I took the class, started researching, found out, oh, wow, people hate God because of evil, pain, and suffering. So it's very important to know these things. And so actually, if I'm not mistaken, a student said he actually was prepared for college better due to this school.
Oh, absolutely. So, we had and he inspired our Link Year program. Mm-hmm. We had a student that came here for 6 months, very intelligent student, graduated from high school in December. And I knew him. He said, can I come to the School of Preaching until I go off to university? Absolutely. So he came for 2 quarters. He had a scholarship to an incredibly liberal university. And matter of fact, I knew a lot of young people that went there, and it was just a horrible experience. Mm-hmm. But this young man came out unscathed. And I got to analyzing that, and I asked him one day, I said, did the school help you any when you went to that university? And he said, oh, yeah. And he mentioned 3 things that blew my mind. Number one, he said, you guys helped prepare me to be a college student. Now, this was an honor student that graduated early from high school, but he said, I didn't know how to write papers. I didn't know how to study to be prepared for college. You guys grounded me in that. Number 2, you prepared me biblically. But number 3, you fortified my faith so that when those challenging questions came, I didn't always know the answers, but I knew that there was an answer. I knew that there was a resource somewhere I could find, or I could call one of you. I knew there was an answer, and I never sat there mortified when I heard these things. And a lot of the arguments, they were not new to me. I'd heard something about them. So it was a really good experience for him. And that's really what inspired our Link Year idea. And so
very nice. Yeah. Yeah. The school's really helped me in apologetics. It's helped me in a lot of ways. And I really appreciate the school. Slowly taking the 3rd year classes. I'll probably get that when I'm 90, but I'll eventually get there.
Yeah.
But I've enjoyed it. Bill, thank you so much for doing this with me.
Thank you. And thank you, Luke, for doing the most important thing, which is to be a faithful gospel preacher, a faithful Christian, a faithful husband. And that's what we want from our graduates. And thank you, man.
Well, I appreciate it a lot. That's all for today. Again, if you want to support the school, or if you want to come to the school, I'll put the website on the link tree. You can go to my social media, and you'll probably see the information on that you'll hear it at the end of this episode. So thank you for listening, and we hope you have a wonderful day, and see you next episode. Hey guys, thanks for listening to this episode of a Study in Truth podcast. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us on social media, or you can reach us at astudyintruth92@gmail.com. And don't forget to rate our show.